At 3:33 p.m. on the darkest day in history, Jesus gave up his spirit. But what happened in the next 7 minutes literally changed the laws of physics, death, and reality as we know it. 7 supernatural phenomena that religious authorities tried to hide for centuries. 7 miracles that prove that man on the cross wasn't just a prophet. He was much more than that. If you have doubts about who Jesus really was, these next minutes will shake your convictions forever, because what you're about to discover isn't in history books. It's buried in the Vatican's secret archives and in manuscripts that the early church wanted to remain silent. This is the lost account of Nicodemus. Jerusalem, 14th of Nisan, 33 AD. The sun had hidden for 3 hours, an unnatural darkness that didn't follow the astronomical laws known to the wise men of that time. Nicodemus, member of the Sanhedrin and secret follower of Jesus, was hidden among the stones of Golgotha, trembling not just with fear, but with a supernatural presence he had never experienced in his 60 years of life. He had arrived there in secret, risking his position, his reputation, his very life. He needed to be there. Something inside him, a voice he couldn't explain, had called him to witness that moment that would divide the history of humanity into 2 parts. What Nicodemus witnessed in those minutes after Jesus' last breath wasn't recorded in the canonical Gospels, but his personal writings, discovered centuries later in a cave near Qumran, reveal details that will make you question everything you thought you knew about that day. Nicodemus wrote in his diary, "At the exact moment I heard the Master's last breath, a roar echoed throughout all Jerusalem. It wasn't the sound of thunder, it wasn't any man's cry. It was as if the earth itself was groaning in pain." First miracle, the temple veil. Imagine the scene. The Temple of Jerusalem, the most sacred construction in the known world, with its marble and gold walls that reflected God's glory. At the center, the Holy of Holies, separated from the rest of the temple by a gigantic veil. It wasn't a common curtain, it was a tapestry 4 fingers thick, so heavy it needed 300 men to move it, woven with gold, purple, and scarlet threads. This veil represented the separation between God and humanity. For 1,500 years, only the high priest could cross it once a year on the Day of Atonement. It was the physical barrier that symbolized our spiritual separation from the sacred. But at 3:33 p.m. that day, something impossible happened. The veil tore from top to bottom. It wasn't human hands, it wasn't wind, it wasn't an accident. As if invisible, divine hands had grabbed that heavy fabric and divided it in 2 pieces like it was paper. The priests who were offering the afternoon sacrifice were paralyzed with terror. The Holy of Holies, the most sacred place on earth, was exposed. For the first time in history, common men could see beyond the veil, and what they saw left them speechless with amazement. There was nothing there. The place that symbolized God's presence was empty, because God had moved. He no longer dwelt in temples made by human hands. The torn veil was the sign. The barrier between heaven and earth had been removed forever. The access was open. The path was free. But this was just the beginning. Second miracle, the supernatural darkness. Nicodemus continued his account. The darkness wasn't natural. I knew eclipses well. I had studied astronomy with the Chaldeans, but that defied all logic. For 3 hours, from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m., darkness covered all the earth. It wasn't a solar eclipse, impossible during Passover, as it was a full moon. Roman historians Thallus and Phlegon recorded this phenomenon as the most extraordinary darkness that ever befell the earth. But when Jesus died, something even more disturbing happened. The darkness didn't dissipate gradually, as would be natural. It was literally torn, as if someone had flipped a cosmic switch. In a matter of seconds, light returned, but it wasn't the same light as before. People who were there described a different luminosity, almost golden, that seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the very atmosphere had changed composition, as if the air had become purer, more crystalline. The Roman soldiers, men trained for war, accustomed to blood and death, began to tremble. Marcus Longinus, the centurion who had pierced Jesus' side, was the first to break the silence. Truly, this was the Son of God. But why did he say that? What did he see in those moments of transition between darkness and light? Third miracle, the selective earthquake. The earth shook, but not like the earthquakes I knew. This one was surgical. The Gospel of Matthew records, "And the earth shook, and the rocks were split." But what the Gospels don't detail is that this wasn't a common earthquake. Modern geologists studying rock formations around Jerusalem discovered evidence of a seismic shock that defies all scientific explanation. The earthquake was selective. It affected only specific places: Golgotha, the temple, and a cemetery near the city. Jerusalem's houses remained intact. The walls didn't crack. The Roman aqueducts continued functioning normally. But at Golgotha, the rock split in a way that defies the laws of geology. It didn't follow natural fracture lines. The stones opened in almost perfect geometric patterns, as if they had been cut by a divine tool. And there was more. The cracks in the rocks formed symbols. Some looked like Hebrew letters, others, drawings that would only make sense centuries later. As if the earth itself was writing a message that humanity was still learning to decipher. Nicodemus noted, "I saw with my own eyes. Where Jesus' blood touched the ground, the rock opened like a flower." Fourth miracle, the dead who rose. But the most disturbing was yet to come. What I saw next made me question everything I knew about life, death, and what exists beyond. Matthew 27:52-53 records something most people read quickly, without understanding the magnitude of what's being described. "And the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised." Stop and think about the dimension of this miracle. It wasn't just Jesus who resurrected. Several people who were already dead, some for decades, came back to life, but not as zombies or ghosts. They returned with physical bodies, recognizable, capable of conversing and being touched. Imagine the scene. You're walking through Jerusalem streets and suddenly encounter your grandfather, who died 20 years ago. He's there, real, talking to you, remembering family details, but with something different in his eyes. A peace, a wisdom he didn't have before. Historical records speak of at least dozens of these resurrections. People returned to their homes, spoke with their families, gave testimony of what they saw beyond death, and all brought the same message. Jesus was who he said he was. Flavius Josephus, the Jewish historian, though not a Christian, recorded, "In those days there appeared in Jerusalem men whom all knew to be dead, and they spoke of a kingdom that was to come." But here's the most intriguing detail. These people didn't remain forever. After a few weeks, they simply disappeared. They didn't die again. They didn't get sick. They simply went away. Fifth miracle, the water and blood. Then I saw the soldier approach with the spear. I thought it was just a mercy blow. I didn't imagine I was about to witness a medical miracle that would challenge science for millennia. John 19:34 records, "But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out." For John, who had no advanced medical knowledge, this was just a detail. But for modern medicine, this is impossible. When a person dies, blood coagulates quickly. Liquid blood doesn't come out of a body that's been dead for more than a few minutes. And water? Where would water come from in the side of a crucified man? Medical examiners who studied the account reached a disturbing conclusion. For blood and water to come out separately from Jesus' side, he would have had to suffer from cardiac tamponade. But there's more. The amount of blood and water that came out was described as abundant, impossible for a man who had lost so much blood during hours of torture. It was as if Jesus' body had become a supernatural fountain. Some ancient manuscripts speak that the blood and water that came from his side had healing properties. People who were touched by them reported instant healings. Sixth miracle, animals in mourning. But perhaps the most disturbing of all signs was the behavior of animals, as if all creation was in mourning. This miracle isn't recorded in canonical Gospels, but appears consistently in Church Fathers' writings and apocryphal manuscripts. At the moment of Jesus' death, all animals in Jerusalem reacted inexplicably. Roman soldiers' horses refused to move. They stood still, trembling, heads down, as if in reverence. Temple doves used for sacrifices stopped singing. Absolute silence fell over the city, but most impressive were the dogs. Known for barking and making noise, especially during public executions, all Jerusalem's dogs began howling in unison. It wasn't a howl of fear or pain, it was a lament, an animal chorus of sadness that lasted exactly 7 minutes. Origen of Alexandria wrote, "The very beasts recognized that he who died was the creator of all things, and they lamented as never seen in history." Modern zoologists can't explain this phenomenon. Animals can sense earthquakes before humans can detect atmospheric changes, but react in a coordinated way to one specific man's death. This defies all animal behavioral logic, unless they really recognized who was dying on that cross. Seventh miracle, the blood rose. And then, in Jesus' last minute of life, I saw something that haunts me to this day, something that changed my faith forever. This is the most controversial miracle, mentioned only in very ancient manuscripts and oral testimonies preserved by primitive Christian communities. When Jesus was about to give up his spirit, the drops of blood falling from his wounds began to form a pattern on the ground. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. It was intentional, supernatural. Jesus' blood, touching Golgotha's arid earth, formed the perfect image of a rose, petal by petal, with details that not even the best artist could reproduce. And then, something even more impossible happened. The blood rose began to glow. A soft, golden light emanated from the pattern formed by the blood. And from this light, a perfume, not the smell of death and blood that dominated Golgotha, but the aroma of Eden's most beautiful flowers. Nicodemus wrote his last words about that day. "I understood at that moment that I wasn't witnessing just the death of a righteous man. I was seeing the moment when God decided to die so that men could live. The blood rose was the sign. From the most terrible death was being born the most beautiful hope. 7 miracles, 7 minutes that changed everything. 7 signs that man dying on the cross wasn't just another Jewish revolutionary condemned by the Roman Empire. The torn veil showed us access to God was open. The dissipated darkness proved light had won. The selective earthquake demonstrated even Earth recognized its creator. The resurrected dead anticipated what would happen 3 days later. The blood and water revealed that from that death flowed eternal life. The animal's lament echoed all creation's broken heart. And the blood rose. The blood rose was God's signature in a moment that seemed like mere defeat. Nicodemus ended his writings with these words, "I came seeking to understand a prophet's death. I left knowing I had witnessed the moment when death itself died." But here's the question that won't be silenced. If these 7 miracles really happened in those first minutes after Jesus' death, what else did you miss because you weren't paying attention to God's signs in your own life? Because I'm certain of one thing. The same God who tore veils, split rocks, and resurrected the dead 2,000 years ago is still doing miracles today. The question is, do you have eyes to see? If these 7 miracles touched your heart, if something inside you moved hearing this story, maybe it's because this video needed to reach you today. Maybe it's because God wants to do a miracle in your life too. Leave in the comments. Which of these 7 miracles impacted you most? Do you believe Jesus really was who he said he was? And if you've experienced any miracle in your life, share it with us. Because miracles didn't stop happening when Jesus resurrected. They just started multiplying. Subscribe to the channel and activate notifications, but only if you have courage to discover more secrets that history tried to hide. Because the truth about Jesus is far more extraordinary than any of us imagines. And remember, if God did all this out of love for you, imagine what He still has prepared for your story.